welcome to the program. Now, AI continues to dominate headlines around the world. You don't have to go far to see something about AI. Now, it is easy to overlook another frontier that has been developing for some time also around the world, and this is quantum science, which is rapidly advancing, albeit without the fanfare that AI has been enjoying. And perhaps it's the intricate nature and the abstract applications that have kept it shrouded in mystery and removed from the public eye. Well, in a recent commentary, a Brookings visiting fellow, Joseph Keller, makes the point that now is the time to prioritize quantum science education, mentioning that, and I quote, meaningful public awareness through more formal education and general literacy initiatives is crucial to ensuring the responsible development, adoption, and support of this groundbreaking technology in the United States, end quote. Here is my conversation with Joseph Keller.
So Joe, take us back. Tell us, why did you feel the need to write this article now at this time?
I'm really glad you asked that question. I think, as you posed, we're in this interesting time where we can't escape in the news talking about what people are calling emerging technologies. These are things like artificial intelligence, things like biotechnology, but also things like quantum computing. We'll call it quantum today. These things have been identified as the future of science and education and research, with significant ties to things like the economy and national security. As you said, AI has been getting the lion's share of the attention. It's all about AI in the news now, but quantum computing is also really important. And you mentioned this lack of understanding. I think this lack of attention is just not about attention. I think it's a problem. I think it has ramifications and connections to policymaking and federal investment in things like education. And so only recently, Congress has taken up steps for these series of bills, mostly to reauthorize legislation that might help us reinfuse resources around quantum that have to do with research, competitiveness, and security. But I think these times are different. The landscape has shifted. I think the stakes are getting higher. There's been this competition from around the world on many things around science and tech, not just around AI. And it has important relevance for things like security that have to do with privacy and cryptography. And I think it's important that the public have some knowledge about how science shapes their everyday lives.
Right. And in this case, you're talking about quantum science, right? And how perhaps it shapes their daily lives. So in the article, you actually say there's been a lack of practical applications, right, in the technology, and that maybe has contributed to the public sort of not, it being elusive. And as you use these words, it's imposing, complex, difficult to grasp, and misunderstood, right? All these things. What is why this gap, right? That is there, because it's not like it's completely new. It's been there for quite some time, right? Why do we still have this gap?
Right. I think one is intangible and one's a tangible. So two aspects here. One is this psychological barrier, it seems, that if you stop someone on the street and you ask them, well, what is it about quantum computing that you could tell me why it's important or interesting or anything about it? People have trouble. And not only is there trouble about a lack of exposure, there seems to be somewhat of a fear or anxiety around it. This is connected to education, which I'd love to talk about more. Yeah. The other has to do with what you can see and touch. We talked about AI and generative AI and chatbots that you can now see on your phone or your computer. It's now at your fingertips. We still don't really know how it works, but it's not as imposing. It's not as scary. And so I think without something at our fingertips and without exposure, it makes it hard for us to conceive of what it is.
Yeah. And you brought up education. So let's go there for a second. So there's been an explosion. Well, I wouldn't say the word explosion, but a growth, right, in terms of initiatives that are trying to engage the public. And so in your article, you reference the testimony of Dr. Emily E. Edwards, right? And she had mentioned in there a couple of initiatives. So tell us about these initiatives that you have come across that are giving you hope with respect to engaging quantum science with the public.
Right. So Dr. Edwards' testimony is really critical to what I learned. I think there are some initiatives, and they're still trying to uncover more. I just want to say a few things first. One is that, I think at the heart of this connection between education and literacy is people. The future of US quantum is connected to people and getting people interested in science and tech. We don't have a pipeline at the moment. And so this exposure in education literacy is directly connected to the people who are necessary to occupy the workforce. Secondly, I think quantum doesn't need this moment, doesn't need to be like AI, but it needs to be closer to people's lives. And so trying to overcome that challenge that has to do with psychology and exposure and familiarity, that's another challenge. So I think right now we need to focus on pulling back sort of that curtain around mystery. The science underneath it are things that we know. We need more formal educational initiatives. We need public awareness. We need to have teachers and students and researchers and practitioners that are ready to meet the work. So, with that in mind, I'm thinking about mostly equipping teachers, helping teachers have access to the resources and knowledge to develop curricula to meet students and people where they are, understanding what their knowledge is, what their exposure is, what their comfort level is, and then work with that. And this, I think, is tied directly to the students that we might miss. There are many students who might shy away from the things that are sort of scary. We all think back to taking that math class or that science class. That's really hard. This happens for everyone, especially relevant for underrepresented students, women, students of color. Thinking about those critical periods in middle school, for example, where not taking that class or shying away for that discipline really could have an impact on how the science resonates for you for the rest of your life. And lastly, thinking about ways to try to sprinkle aspects of quantum computing in the things that we already do. It's connected and deeply rooted in chemistry. Some people know chemistry, but it's also connected to physics and neuroscience. And so trying to make the connection for quantum mechanics and quantum computing broadly to the existing STEM curricula that we have is also a way to try to drive connection.
Yeah, but what about the public though, right? So I get the students, and in fact, in her testimony, the National Q12 Education Partnership, right, which feel free to mention that later. But the public though, who may not be, they're outside the classroom, what of them?
Well, I think they're connected. I mean, most people start in the classroom, right? And so I think trying to make investments that are connected to the classroom, I think, are foundational to having this literacy. But I think the other problem you brought up is a correct one. It's about the public being able to keep pace with what the science and tech they see every day. I think one way we could try to do that is make sure that, diverging from what happened to AI, trying to invest in the literacy at the same time that we're building the products and investing in the research. Right now people who have AI at their fingertips are trying to make sense of what's at their fingertips, but we're also acknowledging that it's troubling and create harms. What if we could try further upstream to make sure we invest at the same time that the technology is being developed and researched, that we invest in comparable efforts around education of the public? And this is tied to taxpayers wanting to know, well, where is my money going? And I think that is also helpful to have an informed citizenry in public.
Yeah.
When we return, I asked Joe about the role of the public beyond being passive consumers of this technology. Is there an active role that they can play? So don't go away.
This special highlight was brought to you by...
Can the public, beyond just saying they should be aware and be knowledgeable about this technology, can they have a role in contributing to its development, right? In this case, quantum science. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's a great question. I think I'm not sure. I think what the efforts that Dr. Edwards and others are trying to do is figure out the ways we can do that. And one of the ways we can try to get at that problem is to invest more in federal programs. And we think about science agencies like the National Science Foundation or the Department of Energy or the National Institutes of Science and Technology. These are the agencies that support this type of research. NSF, I know, funds scholarships, scholarships for service, where you can get support for your education and committing to pursue things that are STEM-related careers, quantum-related careers. The Department of Energy has a similar program, but we need initiatives that go beyond just scholarships and support. And so what I think the Q12 program does, and others are trying to figure out, well, what are the ways that we can engage the public in ways that we have not before? I think what's different about this moment and about this technology is its aspect of anxiety and fear and mystery. Many people acknowledge they don't understand AI. It doesn't keep them from using it. Well, so, what are the barriers potentially to understanding quantum in a similar way? I don't think we know. I certainly don't know. And so I'm excited to see what new reauthorization bills in Congress can do to support the efforts of Dr. Edwards and her colleagues and trying to figure out, what are those methods we can use to engage the public sufficiently so they can cultivate this literacy in ways that they haven't before for something that is equally impactful to society.
Yeah, I think there's a confluence of things happening right now. The NSF has the broader impacts in there. The NIH, of course, I think we're seeing offices being set up perhaps around public engagement. So from your article, it sounds like you're saying quantum should not be left behind, right? It should be sort of an inactive process. Sorry, go ahead.
Right, and I absolutely agree with you. And just going one step further to say that not only should it be left behind, it maybe requires a different approach. And so trying to figure out what that different approach may mean for equally important stakes, I think is a next challenge we should try to attack. And I think at the grounding of that has to do with people and education and public literacy.
Right, because you brought up the idea of the questions, right? We don't know what the questions are, even the answers. And so what is your hope with your article? You hope researchers to read this and begin to probe these questions? You hope that developers read the article and say, how do we develop new quantum science programming? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good one. I rely on the researchers and the developers to help inform the type of research I do. I want policymakers to read this. I want them to recognize what we don't know and the importance of what we don't know, and think about ways that we can shore up and divert and allocate resources to something that's sorely needed. And one of the reasons I think it's important now is because AI is the thing that sucks up all the oxygen in the room, and it's appropriate. But what's also appropriate is that we can do more than one thing at a time, and that's what Congress needs to do. And so I want policymakers to read this, acknowledge to themselves and to the country that this may be something different than we're used to, and we should think about how to approach it at the same time that we're dealing with other challenges related to science and tech and education in the U.S.
Yeah, and of course, AI and quantum are connected, of course, right? Right. So naturally, I think there will be that sort of confluence and discussion points that need to take place. Perhaps, museums, right? We begin to see some quantum being sprinkled in everything, as you said, right? It's everywhere.
Yes, I'd love my next visit to a museum to include a tour related to quantum research and education.
All right, man. I wish we could just keep on talking because there's so much in there. So in the next couple of years, let's end with predictions. What do you predict? Do you foresee an explosion of engagement opportunities in around quantum, or something else, or maybe you don't know? What's your take here, predictions wise? Next 2 to 3 years.
I try to stay out of the business of predictions, but I think one or two things could happen. One could be something happens in the world that causes us to react. That could be vulnerabilities dealing with security, dealing with cryptography, with national security that captures attention not just of the world and U.S. Citizens, but also of lawmakers. reacting is part of the way we get things done. I hope that's not the case. The other has to do with breakthroughs in science, that there may be breakthroughs from industry and academic labs that bridge the gap between experimental quantum computers that we have now and practical challenges that we need, and shows us how we can create these quantum computers to do the things we need to do or want to do right now, as opposed to things that are in the experimental realm. So whether it's from threats from around the world, or it's from scientific breakthroughs, I think one of those two things could really get our attention.
Thank you so much for joining me on this inaugural conversation in our program on this topic. We barely scratched the surface, and I thank Joe Keller for stopping by and having a conversation with me. So how public engagement initiatives continue to grow and expand in this space will be fascinating to follow as those stories begin to emerge. So until next time, thank you so much for joining me today on this program.